Our first coin takes us back to the United Kingdom in 1982, and specifically to the humble 2p coin. At first glance, this may look like nothing more than an ordinary piece of British pocket change. It was a denomination people could spend without thinking twice. It could be found in wallets, purses, shop tills, jars, drawers, and old collections. But that ordinary appearance is exactly what makes coins like this so interesting. A coin that once had almost no attention from the average person can become a fascinating collectible when history, condition, scarcity, unusual varieties, or a remarkable provenance enter the picture. The 1982 United Kingdom 2p belongs to the decimal coinage system introduced in Britain in 1971. Decimalisation represented one of the biggest changes in modern British monetary history. Britain moved away from the complicated system of pounds, shillings, and pence and adopted a decimal structure in which £1 was divided into 100 pence. The 2p denomination became part of that new system and quickly became one of the familiar coins of everyday British life. The 1982 issue was produced during a period when Britain was already more than a decade into decimal currency. By this time, millions of people were completely accustomed to decimal coins, and the 2p had become an ordinary part of daily transactions. Yet every one of these coins also captured a tiny piece of the economic and social history of the United Kingdom during the early 1980s. The obverse carries the portrait of Queen Elizabeth II, who appeared on British decimal coins during this period. The portrait used on the 1982 2p was created by Arnold Machin, one of the most important British coin and metal designers of the 20th century. His portrait of Queen Elizabeth II became one of the most recognizable images ever placed on British circulating coinage. Turn the coin over, and the reverse immediately reveals the feature that makes the British 2p so distinctive. The design shows the badge of the Prince of Wales, featuring 3 ostrich feathers beneath a coronet, accompanied by the traditional motto associated with the design. This reverse was created by Christopher Ironside, whose work played an important role in Britain's transition to decimal coinage. The denomination appears clearly as 2p, while the date identifies the year 1982. The combination of the royal portrait, denomination, date, and heraldic reverse gives this small coin a strong connection to British national history. It is not simply metal with a number stamped onto it. It represents the visual language Britain chose for its new decimal currency. The 1982 2p was struck in bronze, and the familiar copper-colored appearance is one of the first things collectors notice. Its standard specifications are approximately 25.9 mm in diameter and around 7.12 grams in weight, with a plain edge. These specifications are useful when examining a suspected unusual example because weight, diameter, and overall construction can help determine whether a coin is genuine or whether something unusual has happened to it. For collectors, condition is one of the most important factors. A heavily circulated 1982 2p may show scratches, discoloration, contact marks, worn details, and loss of its original surface quality. Millions of coins were used in everyday commerce, so finding an example that has survived with exceptionally sharp details and attractive original surfaces can be much more interesting. An uncirculated example can look dramatically different from a coin that spent years moving through circulation. The lettering can appear stronger, the reverse design can remain crisp, and the surfaces may retain much more of their original appearance. Collectors examining older British decimal coins often pay close attention to these details because condition can make an ordinary circulating coin far more desirable. Another reason collectors examine coins like this carefully is the possibility of varieties and errors. An error coin is not automatically valuable simply because it looks different. A genuine minting error needs to be carefully identified and authenticated. Possible characteristics that collectors investigate include unusual strikes, doubling, off-center strikes, die problems, planchet abnormalities, incorrect metal, or other production anomalies. However, damage that happens after the coin leaves the mint is not the same thing as a mint error. This distinction is extremely important. A coin that has been scratched with a tool, heated, chemically altered, drilled, bent, or damage through normal use should not automatically be described as a rare mint error. Serious collectors compare the suspected variety with known examples and examine the coin's weight, dimensions, design details, and surfaces before reaching a conclusion. Authenticity is equally important. Anyone examining a supposedly valuable 1982 2P should avoid relying only on photographs or dramatic claims. Check the date, lettering, portrait, reverse design, edge, weight, diameter, and overall construction. If a coin appears exceptionally unusual, professional authentication can be worthwhile before making any major valuation decision. There is also an important lesson here about coin collecting. Rarity does not always mean simply old. The 1982 2P is over 4 decades old, but age alone does not make every example extraordinarily valuable. The real collectible story comes from the combination of scarcity, condition, variety, demand, historical significance, and documented authenticity. That is why experienced collectors can spend considerable time examining inexpensive-looking coins. They understand that the most interesting discovery may not come from a spectacular gold coin locked inside a museum. Sometimes it begins with a small bronze coin sitting unnoticed in an old box. The 1982 2P also has strong nostalgia for people who remember Britain during the early 1980s. For older collectors, coins from this period can bring back memories of shops, newspapers, buses, markets, household purchases, and everyday life. For younger collectors, the same coin provides a tangible connection to a period they may know only through photographs and history books. Internationally, British decimal coins also attract collectors because British coinage is followed by enthusiasts far beyond the United Kingdom. Collectors of Queen Elizabeth II coinage, British decimal currency, world coins, and historical currency can all have reasons to study an example from 1982. Now we come to the part that often creates the biggest excitement: value. You may see extraordinary online claims suggesting that a 1982 United Kingdom 2-pence coin could be worth as much as $21 million. That $21 million figure should be treated as a claimed or hypothetical headline value, not as the normal market price for an ordinary 1982 2P. A standard circulated example is generally not automatically worth millions simply because it carries the date 1982. Extraordinary values would require extraordinary circumstances, such as a genuinely unique error, an exceptionally rare variety, exceptional condition, or an important documented history that makes the specific coin highly desirable to serious collectors. So if you have a 1982 British 2P, don't immediately throw it away. But don't assume that every example is a multi-million-dollar treasure either. Examine it carefully. Look at the surfaces, check the details, compare the weight and dimensions, and pay particular attention to anything that appears genuinely unusual. The real lesson of the 1982 2P is that valuable discoveries begin with careful observation. A coin that once passed from hand to hand may still have a story waiting to be uncovered. And if your particular example has an authenticated rarity, an unusual minting error, exceptional preservation, or another feature that separates it from ordinary examples, that is where the serious collector interest begins. For the 1982 United Kingdom 2-pence, the headline figure we are discussing today is $21 million. But that figure should never be confused with the guaranteed value of every coin from the year. The actual worth of any individual coin depends on its specific characteristics, condition, authenticity, rarity, and what qualified collectors are prepared to pay for that exact example. Second coin. Now we move to the 1983 United Kingdom 2-pence, a coin that looks remarkably ordinary until you know exactly what to look for. For generations, British 2p coins were handled without a second thought. They were used in shops, saved in jars, dropped into pockets, and eventually forgotten. But the 1983 date is especially interesting because this was the year when a famous British decimal coin variety appeared, and that makes the 1983 2p an important date for anyone searching through older British coins. The United Kingdom introduced the 2p denomination on February 15, 1971, as part of Britain's conversion to decimal currency. The Royal Mint confirms that the early 2p design was part of the country's new decimal system, and the denomination continued with essentially the same physical dimensions for decades. By 1983, Britain had already been using decimal currency for more than 12 years. The public was familiar with the new system, but British coinage was still evolving. One of the most important changes had already occurred in 1982, when the wording on the reverse changed. Earlier coins carried the words, "New Pence," while the revised design used, "2 pence." The Royal Mint records that "new" was removed in 1982. That small change is the key to understanding why some 1983 2p coins are so interesting. The standard 1983 2p features the second portrait of Queen Elizabeth II on the obverse. This portrait was designed by Arnold Machin and was used on British circulating coinage from 1971 through 1984. On the reverse is the famous badge of the Prince of Wales, featuring 3 ostrich feathers emerging from a coronet. The reverse design was created by Christopher Ironside. The coin is bronze, with a composition of approximately 97% copper, 2.5% zinc, and 0.5% tin. It weighs about 7.12 grams, measures approximately 25.9 millimeters across, is about 1.85 millimeters thick, and has a plain edge. Those specifications matter because collectors do not identify valuable coins simply by looking at the date. They examine the entire coin. Weight, diameter, lettering, portrait details, reverse design, edge, color, and surfaces can all help establish whether a coin is a normal example or something much more unusual. And with the 1983 2p, one particular detail deserves your full attention. Look at the reverse. A normal 1983 2p should say 2 pence. But a small number of 1,983 examples were accidentally struck using the older reverse die carrying the words "New Pence." This is known as a Mule error because the coin combines design elements that were not supposed to appear together. The Royal Mint's change in wording makes the mistake especially significant. By 1983, "New Pence" was no longer supposed to appear on the regular 2p reverse. This is what separates the fascinating 1983 2p from an ordinary older British 2p. The unusual, "New Pence" 1983 pieces are associated with collector sets rather than being ordinary mass-produced circulation coins. Numismatic references describe them as a small number of coins struck with the incorrect reverse die, and some examples were included in special brilliant uncirculated sets. For someone looking through a collection today, that creates an exciting possibility. Imagine finding an old box containing British decimal coins. You see a 2p dated 1983. At first, it appears completely ordinary. You turn it over and expect to see 2 pence. But instead the words, "New Pence," are staring back at you. That is the moment when the coin deserves much closer examination. The important thing is not to confuse this with every 1983 2p. Most 1983 2p coins are not the famous Mule. The date alone is not enough. The critical feature is the reverse wording. This is also a perfect example of why serious coin collecting requires knowledge rather than simply looking for old dates. A person who does not know about the 1983 Mule could easily overlook it. A collector who understands the design transition immediately knows that the combination of the 1983 date and "New Pence" deserves attention. There is another lesson here. Not every unusual-looking coin is rare. Modern coins can acquire scratches, dents, discoloration, stains, edge damage, or other marks after leaving the mint. Those are not automatically mint errors. A genuine error should be consistent with a minting process and should be evaluated against established references and authenticated examples. The 1983 Mule is different because the unusual reverse design is a documented variety. The wrong reverse die was used with the 1983 dated obverse, creating a combination that should not normally have existed. For collectors, this makes the coin historically important as well as financially interesting. It captures a moment of transition in British decimal coinage. One small mistake preserved the older, "New Pence" wording after the official design had changed to 2 pence. The coin's physical design also carries an impressive amount of British history. The obverse portrait connects it to Queen Elizabeth II and the long era of her reign. The reverse connects it to the heraldic tradition represented by the Prince of Wales badge. The denomination itself connects the coin to Britain's decimalisation program. In ordinary circulated condition, a normal 1983 2p should not automatically be considered a fortune. Circulated British decimal coins of this type can often be worth little beyond their basic collectible interest. The difference comes when the coin possesses a recognized variety, exceptional condition, or another unusual characteristic. Current collecting references specifically distinguish the 1983 Mule from the standard 1983 issue. Condition can make a major difference for the desirable variety. A heavily worn example may still be interesting, but a sharply preserved brilliant uncirculated specimen can be much more attractive to collectors. Proof and specially packaged examples can also have a different market than ordinary circulated coins. This is why you should never clean a potentially valuable coin. Cleaning may remove original surface characteristics and can actually reduce collector appeal. If you believe you have discovered a rare 1983 Mule, handle it carefully by the edges and keep it in a suitable protective holder. Do not polish it, scrape the lettering, or attempt to make the browns look brighter. Authentication is another major step. Because valuable varieties attract counterfeits and altered coins, collectors should compare the coin with trusted references and, when appropriate, seek professional examination. Weight and diameter can provide useful preliminary information, but authentication involves much more than placing a coin on a scale. Now let's talk about the extraordinary value figure associated with today's video. A headline figure of $25 million may sound unbelievable for a small British 2p coin, and it is important to understand exactly what that number means. A $25 million figure should be treated as a claimed or hypothetical extraordinary valuation, not as the guaranteed selling price of every 1983 2p. An ordinary 1983 coin is certainly not automatically worth $25 million. For a value anywhere near such an extraordinary figure to become realistic, the individual coin would need to be extraordinarily special, authenticated, and supported by exceptional rarity, provenance, condition, or another factor that makes it uniquely desirable. In real collecting, market value is established by what qualified buyers are actually willing to pay for a specific authenticated coin, not simply by an internet headline. But that does not make the 1983 2p unimportant. Quite the opposite. The 1983 Mule has become one of the most recognizable British decimal coin varieties because it demonstrates how a tiny manufacturing mistake can transform an ordinary denomination into a major collector curiosity. Contemporary collectors and later enthusiasts continue to search for it precisely because the identification is so simple once you know the secret. Check the date, then turn the coin over and read the wording. If it says 2 pence, you have the normal reverse. If it says new pence on a genuine 1983 example, you may have something much more interesting. That simple inspection is one reason this coin remains so popular with treasure hunters, inherited collection owners, British coin specialists, and people who enjoy searching through old jars of change. The 1983 United Kingdom 2p is a reminder that rarity can hide in a tiny detail. A single word can separate an ordinary coin from a famous era variety. A date can suddenly become much more important when combined with the wrong reverse. And a coin that once represented only 2 pence in everyday commerce can become an object of serious historical and numismatic interest decades later. So if you ever come across an old British 2p dated 1983, don't just glance at it and put it back. Turn it over, read the words. Check the surfaces, check the weight, study the design, and most importantly, remember that the real treasure is not simply the number printed in a headline. The real treasure is discovering exactly what makes your particular coin different. For today's featured 1983 United Kingdom 2 pence, the extraordinary headline value being discussed is $25 million. But the actual market value of an individual coin depends entirely on its authenticity, condition, variety, rarity, provenance, and collector demand. The most important thing is to identify the coin correctly before placing any value on it. Third coin. Welcome to the third coin in our journey through the remarkable British 2p pieces of the early 1980s. This time, we are looking at the 1984 United Kingdom 2p, a coin that deserves much more attention than its tiny face value suggests. At first glance, the 1984 2p looks like a simple bronze coin from everyday British life. But there is an important detail that separates this particular year from many ordinary circulating 2p coins. The 1984 issue was produced for Royal Mint sets rather than for normal general circulation, making it an especially interesting date for collectors searching through British decimal coinage. To understand why this matters, we need to go back to the beginning of Britain's decimal currency story. The 2p coin was introduced on February 15, 1971, when the United Kingdom moved into the decimal era. Instead of the old system of pounds, shillings, and pence, the new system divided £1 into 100 pence. The 2p became one of the basic denominations of this new monetary system. The early decimal 2p coins carried the words, "new pence," on their reverse. This wording was originally intended to help the public distinguish the new decimal denominations from Britain's old pre-decimal money. But by 1982, the Royal Mint had removed "new" from the design. The change represented the fact that decimal currency was no longer new to the British public. That historical transition is extremely important when examining a 1984 2p. The standard 1984 British 2p carries the portrait of Queen Elizabeth II on the obverse. This was the famous second portrait designed by Arnold Mackin. Mackin's portrait appeared on British decimal circulating coins from 1971 through 1984 and became one of the most recognizable images in modern British numismatic history. The reverse was designed by Christopher Ironside, whose decimal coin designs helped establish the visual identity of Britain's new currency. On the reverse of these numbers are not just technical information for collectors. They are useful tools for authentication. If you believe you have discovered an unusual 1984 2p, weighing it can provide an important first check. A substantial difference from the expected weight could indicate damage, an unusual planchet, alteration, or potentially another production-related issue. Diameter and thickness can also be compared with known specifications. But collectors should never make a final determination from weight alone. The surface tells another part of the story. A genuine older bronze coin may develop darker tones, brown coloration, or natural surface changes over time. That does not automatically mean the coin is damaged. In fact, collectors can prefer original surfaces over coins that have been aggressively cleaned. This is particularly important with potentially valuable pieces. Never polish a coin simply because you think a brighter surface will make it worth more. Cleaning can leave scratches and unnatural surfaces that reduce collector appeal. Now, the most fascinating part of the 1984 2p is its production history. Unlike many dates that were struck in large quantities for circulation, the 1984 2p was issued only in Royal Mint sets according to specialist British coin references. That means the coin had a very different journey from a typical pocket change 2p. Rather than being produced primarily for millions of everyday transactions, it was made as part of the collecting market. That difference is precisely why collectors pay attention to the date. When a coin is not commonly released into circulation, finding one loose in an old accumulation of British change can immediately raise questions. Was it removed from a mint set decades ago? Was it part of a family collection? Was it inherited? Did it somehow enter circulation after being separated from its original packaging? Those stories can make individual examples more interesting. There is also a broader lesson here about rarity. A coin does not have to be ancient to be collectible. The 1984 2p is only a few decades old, but its production circumstances can make it more interesting than a much older coin that was produced in enormous quantities. Collectors often examine three things together: how many were produced, how many survived in high quality, and how much demand exists today. Condition becomes particularly important with a coin like this. A heavily handled piece may show scratches, contact marks, discoloration, or other signs of circulation. A brilliant uncirculated example can retain much sharper details and more attractive surfaces. Proof examples can be even more distinctive because they were manufactured using specialized techniques intended to produce a highly detailed collector finish. The difference between an ordinary-looking coin and a beautiful high-grade example can be dramatic. Look closely at Queen Elizabeth II portrait. The hair, facial features, lettering, and surrounding details should remain crisp on a high-quality specimen. Then examine the Prince of Wales feathers on the reverse. The individual design elements should be clearly defined, and the denomination should be complete and sharp. Collectors also inspect the date itself. Since 1984 is an important set-only year, the date is one of the first things that should be checked when sorting older British 2p coins. Another fascinating part of the story is the connection between the 1984 issue and the famous 1983 New Pence error. The Royal Mint explains that the wording changed from New Pence to the later wording beginning in 1982. But a small number of 1,983 coins were mistakenly struck with the old New Pence reverse. Those pieces are a recognized and famous British decimal era variety. That means collectors should not simply assume that every early 1980s 2p with unusual lettering is valuable. The exact date and design combination matters enormously. A genuine 1984 example should be studied against the correct 1984 design. If you encounter an unusual coin, compare its lettering, portrait, reverse, weight, diameter, edge, and surfaces with established references. And if something appears genuinely unusual, professional authentication is the safest route. This brings us to the question that attracts the most attention: value. You may encounter claims that a 1984 United Kingdom 2 pence could be worth as much as $30 million. That $30 million figure should be treated as an extraordinary claimed or hypothetical headline value, not as the normal market price for an ordinary 1984 2p. A standard example is not automatically worth millions. The actual market value of a particular coin depends on its authenticity, condition, finish, rarity, provenance, collector demand, and whether it contains a recognized error or variety. Specialist price references currently list ordinary 1984 examples at modest collector values rather than anything remotely approaching millions. That difference is extremely important. A coin can be historically interesting without being worth a fortune. It can also become much more valuable if an unusual feature is authenticated and strongly sought after by collectors. For example, imagine two 1984 2p coins sitting beside each other. One is heavily worn, scratched, and discolored. The other has sharp details, original surfaces, and excellent preservation from a Royal Mint set. Even though both have the same date and denomination, collectors may view them very differently. This is why serious collectors do not simply ask, "How old is it?" They ask, "What exactly is it?" They want to know where it came from, how it was produced, how many were made, how it survived, what condition it is in, and whether it has a recognized variety. The 1984 2p also has an emotional value that cannot be measured on a price chart. For people who remember Britain in the 1980s, the design immediately brings back an era of Queen Elizabeth II, traditional British shops, cash payments, old tills, and the familiar bronze coins that once filled pockets and household coin jars. For international collectors, it provides another piece of the enormous story of British decimal coinage. And that is why this little coin continues to deserve attention. If you find a 1984 United Kingdom 2p, don't immediately assume it is ordinary. First, confirm the date. Then examine the reverse design. Check the condition. Look for unusual characteristics. Measure the coin if necessary. Compare it with trusted references. And if you believe you have something exceptional, avoid cleaning it and seek professional authentication. The most valuable lesson is that rarity must be demonstrated, not imagined. An internet listing can show an enormous asking price, but an asking price is not the same as a completed sale. A dramatic headline is not the same as an authenticated valuation. And a coin's face value is certainly not the same thing as its potential collectible value. The 1984 2p is fascinating precisely because it sits at the intersection of everyday British money and specialist collecting. Its set-only production history gives the date added significance, while its classic Mackin portrait and Prince of Wales reverse preserve the visual identity of an important period in British coinage. And now we arrive at the extraordinary value figure associated with today's story, $30 million. Again, that figure should be understood as a headline or hypothetical extraordinary valuation, not a guaranteed price for every 1984 2p. A normal example does not automatically command anything close to that amount. For an individual coin to reach an extraordinary valuation, it would require exceptional circumstances, such as a genuinely rare and authenticated error, extraordinary preservation, remarkable provenance, or another characteristic capable of creating exceptional collector demand. So the next time you see a small bronze British 2p from 1984, don't judge it by its size. Look at the date. Look at the portrait. Look at the feathers. Look at the lettering. Look at the surfaces. Because sometimes the difference between an ordinary piece of old money and a fascinating collectible is hidden in details that most people never think to examine.